Hey, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So welcome to another episode of Beat and Ask by Dr. Wealth. Today I have Gillian with me. She's the founder of Homage, right? Healthcare provider. She will elaborate more later, right? Okay, because healthcare is also a very big thing. And I first known her a few years ago where I met up with her in one of the sessions where it's through some introduction. And I found that it's very rare to have a woman entrepreneur in Singapore, right? So that was the first thing that came across me, because in my environment, I always meet with a lot of guys, especially in investing, especially in business. So it was quite refreshing kind of experience, I would say, and different perspective that you have shared with me. And I also saw that PM Lee mentioned about you and Homage during one of the National Day rally in 2017, right? I think 3 years ago. So I guess that was where a lot more people know about the services of Homage and things like this, right? And prior to that, you had a startup in the US, right? Called Rocket Trip. And then thereafter, you came back. So my very first question is that why did you come back to Singapore, right? When you're already having a business in the US?
Yeah, I think I've shared this quite very openly. I think one of the reasons, first of all, I think it's good to keep in touch with Alvin. I think I remember first conversations. And I always want to support Dr. Wealth, and I think Alvin just strikes me as a very down to earth entrepreneur and founder, and I just feel that I always want to support whatever you do. So anyway, it's good to be here.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me. I think coming back to Singapore, I think one of the reasons is because, put simply, I just felt that I'd spent so much time overseas, and it was time for me to spend more time with family. I think that's one kind of big factor. And then another factor was I was very curious. I would say curiosity, because there was this, sometimes when you know something is right, you just kind of inherently just desire it. So I felt like, in some ways, I know it's a weird way to put it, but I was drawn back to Asia. So some of my friends moved home from the US, and I also had some friends who were in the investing space here. Plus, they were also started companies, in Indonesia, Hong Kong, India, and some of the friends I have we went to school together in the US. So when they moved back to Asia, then they were telling me, hey, Gillian, this and that was happening. And so definitely I felt it was a good time for me to explore. And I think one major event was family event. So my sister moved back from Singapore. I mean, not say back lah. So she met her husband in Perth. So they spent actually many years in Perth, and they just felt after 6 years in Singapore, it was time to move back with the children. So then my mom was here by herself. So everything fit together at the same time, and we just felt good timing, and glad I made the move. Actually, it's been really nice to be back.
Okay, so welcome back, and
it's been 4 years. It's been 4 years. You don't need to welcome me already. I'm like living here and happily living here.
Actually, I find it very apt, because the startup that you're championing now is Homage, right? So it seems like there was a lot of significance to it when after you have spent so much years abroad. And I did read some of your previous interviews that you were mentioning that you have always moved through life because of your friends, right? You changed school because of your friends, and then you went to Australia to study because of your sister. Now you're back because of your family. So it seems like you are a person that value a lot of this relationship, and that shapes your decision a lot. Would you say that?
I think it was actually when I went to the US that I was starting to make decisions, independently. And that's why I felt that the time in the US was so definitive for me as a person, because it really helped define who I was. And I actually spent a long time focusing on, of course, I built many close friendships in the US, but actually this last 4 years have been a reorientation, I would say, towards family and friends. And I think also with Homage, I feel like we're actually making a lot of impact, and the team we've been going through so much, heartfelt experiences together, and it's been very tight knit. So, and we go through a lot, particularly in the last 6 months. I mean, it hasn't been easy for everybody, but the impact that we see is very visceral because we work with caregivers, and this concept of care has been on my mind for the last 4 years. What does it mean to care for someone? And naturally, when you hear so many stories, you also think back about yourself, and you think back about who in your life provided care for you. And I think that's the magical thing about Homage is, like, for me, like, at least it brought me full circle. Like so I wouldn't say I've always focused a lot on relationships, particularly when I was in the US. I was always very go. Last 4 years, I think building Homage is definitely brought a new appreciation, I would say, for all of the people that have provided care to me. So I always speak about this, but I did grow up with one of my grandmother plus my actually key figure in my life was someone who took care of me when I was from the moment I was born till I was 12 years old. And she was like my nanny, because at the time, my mom really needed a lot of help, and she had 2 other kids, plus of course we were going through certain other things as a family. And so I just remember her as, I call her auntie auntie. She's from KL, and I spent every day, almost every after I come home from school, she'll be the person I spend the most time with. And I think in many ways, she probably feels a lot of what I do for Homage. I always think about her.
Yeah. So the reason why I asked that was because as a guy entrepreneur, right? So when I mix around, usually when you get some guy entrepreneur to share, what have you learned, the lessons, well, they will talk about things. They don't talk about people. But when you talk to a female entrepreneur, they usually talk about people and relationship and why they do certain things, right? So it's almost exactly as what you have shared, right? It seems like Homage is better to have a female driver than a male driver. Can I say that?
No, I wouldn't say that. I think Xiaoning will have a lot of things to say about that too. Where's Xiaoning? I wish she was tuning in, but I wouldn't say that. I think of course we can look at the data and the stats. Like, I'm always very focused on data. So we look at if a board has or a C-suite has a female C-suite or a female board member, what does that look like in terms of revenue? I think you'll find some very interesting numbers. So of course, right now the numbers are still not great because it's still very skewed towards, as you mentioned, right, like
male dominated,
super male dominated, and even in the US as well, that translates. New York and Singapore tends to be a little bit more female founder friendly or female investor friendly, and there's a lot of, I would say, groups of pockets of people who are really looking to ensure there's more equal representation, because there's a recognition that that's better for business, And I would tell you, like, the best male leaders and male mentors that I have would tell you that focus on people would probably be the most important, whether you're a female or a male founder. And I think Shari will also say that, Alvin, do you think you should go and meet more female founders?
I think I should, right? But the statistics doesn't. But the
Yeah,
statistics doesn't help, right? The probability of meeting a female founder is
No,
difficult.
it's true though. Yeah.
By the way, you're the first female that we have on the show.
Are you serious? Well, I think I have 5 people I can refer. Like, maybe not just 5. See, this is the problem. I have I can count the number of number of founders, investors that are female that I've met with I guess there's only a sort of a handful of them. Yeah. Well, we have this female founders group though. It's like, there's a good number of people, so I can definitely forward you more names, investors. Yeah. So plenty of them. Yeah.
Okay. And you have done business in the US and you've done business in Singapore, right? So can you share a little bit about the differences in the entrepreneurship scenes in these 2 countries?
Yeah, I think in terms of the scene, there's a few things. So I can talk about capital, I can talk about people, I can talk about product. So maybe I talk about capital first. So capital, I think because of the ecosystem, so ecosystem of startups, it's just, of course, a much larger. If you look at Singapore, of course, then that's a different conversation. But if you look at Southeast Asia, the kind of fragmentation, capital tends to also be concentrated in certain, regions in Southeast Asia. In the US, we definitely see, I would say, a larger number of later stage investors. I think Asia is catching up, but we're still sort of very behind in terms of that. There's this gap. There is still a chasm between earlier stage investments and later stage. You can look at the numbers from capital infusion, like how many across all the industries, from healthcare to education to deep tech and so on.
When you say late stage, are you referring to like Series B and above?
I would say growth stage. So yeah, B and above, exactly. Yep. So and I think that's the state. In the US, it is more mature. They have more benchmarks. So if you track if you plot in the scatter chart, right, like all of the, and I think that would appeal very well to you, because Dr. Wealth platform. So you can see how many VCs were established over the last 20, 30 years. Then you realize that actually, Southeast Asia is still nascent. And actually, and then you track their success, and you track a VC success by their exits, right, and their value creation over time. And they have more data. So with more data, they have more benchmarks. So that also makes up for a more mature ecosystem. So definitely, I would say that's one that I've definitely noticed, is that number of investors here that are moving in the sort of a late stage standpoint is much smaller, which means you have to be a lot more targeted with your fundraising.
Okay. Do you think this is another factor? Could be the total addressable market is probably smaller compared to, say, in the US. Is that a factor at all?
I think, the US is 300 million pop, but Southeast Asia, if you look at just Indonesia and Thailand, that's already exceeds. But I think depending on the market you're looking at, generally speaking, I would say not necessarily true. So I do think that the emerging tech, if you look at when the adoption of mobile technology and web technology, it's all much, I think we're talking about like a 10-year gap between the US and Asia. And that translates into a lot of the value created from digital transactions, right? So, but I feel that in some ways, you have to carve out certain countries that are, I would say, exogenous from this consideration. Like China is one, India is another. So they are a little bit exogenous because of the way that, it's part of the socio-political fabric as well of the country. Like, I feel like China has just skipped over, like, now they're not even looking. So typically you have e-commerce, right? B2C e-commerce, then, e-commerce and marketplaces are going, and then after that, B2B SaaS, and then that's the deep tech AI machine learning. So that was like the trajectory of the US in terms of investment amounts, and the numbers speak for themselves. But in China, I think they've just sort of leapfrogged into like the AI and machine learning phase already, into IoT and wearables. So I'm very fascinated with, I don't think you can make general overarching statements about investments for Asia as a whole, but maybe for Singapore, that's absolutely true. I mean, we're talking about like 6 mil. It's like a 50x difference between the US and Singapore.
Yeah. So, yeah. Okay, because Asia is just too diverse, right? With so many different kind of characters.
Yeah, every country in Southeast Asia is like a brand new market. So we look at it. You have to look at it very differently. Yeah. I think that's one area as well. That's one area that's very different too. The US is like
homogeneous, right? It's a lot more homogeneous.
Yeah, it's a lot more homogeneous. Yeah.
Whereas as a Singapore startup, if let's say you want to expand even within Southeast Asia, when you move to a neighboring country, it's like totally different. It could be the stage of the economic development, purchasing power, religion, language. There are a lot of differences, right? So that poses a challenge.
True. And I think another big difference is the I would say hiring, because if you think about it, right, like how many startups are started every day or every month in the US, and how many startups are there Series A stage, seed A, B, C, and go and so on, and the stages of growth, and that creates this talent pool that understands the dynamic and the kind of growth mindset that you need in terms of operating at a startup. And then that leads to sort of a healthier or easier hiring. I mean, it's still difficult, but I would say I've experienced, like in Singapore, is so much harder. I don't know whether you've experienced this, but to hire really, really like those who have at least 5 to 10 years of experience in a startup, really difficult. So, whereas in the US, you generally can find people that, for example, have worked maybe at Google for some time, and then they've hopped off and worked for a startup for like 3-5 years. And that startup experience is very key, because it's quite different when you have, as opposed to working at a much later stage company.
Okay.
So
when you talk about difference, is it more like a mindset, or is it more like a skill set thing?
Well, generally speaking, I would say that, if you to hire within a domain, like for example, and financial analysis, that's easier. So in Singapore, if I hire someone's really good at data science or like analytics, just for that specific specialization, it's easier. But the moment you cross domain, so like for example, this person needs to have some form of P&L experience or commercial experience with a little bit of so the sales experience, and that generally is harder. Or like if you're looking for a financial controller or regional financial controller who knows how to establish like operations across like the Southeast Asian region, but knows how a startup works, that's generally quite difficult. But so you tend to find a lot of hiring hacks, and speaking with quite a number of founders, I found a number of good hacks. So like for example, I spoke with one founder lately. I mean, they've scaled it now across I would say 6 countries, and so the person was saying basically you should look at hiring someone the strategy has been to hire someone more junior and then train them out. So they might be lacking in maybe 3 to 5 years of experience, but it's much better than finding someone with that experience but they don't have that growth mindset. Sort of
So it's like a balance between that skill set and mindset thing.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Right. So you mentioned about 2 things. So capital is one, and I guess people is the other. So in terms of, so it's like the whole ecosystem in the US is just 10 years ahead in terms of maturity compared to Singapore.
I think anecdotally that was my experience in terms of. I think things have changed, progressed really quickly in Southeast Asia. So, for example, when I moved home, and I think for Homage's seed round, like we were trying to raise off of a note, and I'll be very open. Fine, we raised off of a note, a convertible note, and I think when we were talking to all these investors, the concept of a note was still fairly. Not accepted for the seed round. So there was still sort of pushback. Whereas in the US, it's almost like a given. Like you don't even think about it. Like you can have a handshake deal too and say, okay, it's going to be like whatever, like 1.2 mil on a 5 mil cap or whatever, or 1.5.
You don't even need a term sheet?
No, you don't need a term sheet for a seed round. Exactly. So you just go straight into like signing that convertible note, and it's a very sort of, it's like common knowledge that is a very acceptable way of closing a deal. Of course, some investors will still have preferences to close an equity round, but generally speaking, this is just as an example for a seed stage. That's just one example, right? But nowadays, though, I think things have changed quite a bit. I'm very hopeful. I mean, that's why I'm back, because I love helping to build the ecosystem and being a small part of it. And it's been fun growing with the founders alongside, and. Okay. Like investors.
Thanks for helping growing the.
No. We're all growing. No, I'm growing up myself too. So we're all growing up together. So.
Okay. Yeah. Because the thought that I have is that it's always very difficult to even do a catch up with the more innovative and talent magnet countries like the US, right? So it's like I don't know how much more we can catch up in that space. I don't think we can really be on par with in terms of innovation with more of these big countries, right? So I'm always very curious, where would Singapore find its footing as the world changes?
Yeah,
I don't know what your view about that.
That's a really good point, Alvin. Like I think about that sometimes too. I wonder if we can, I think there are certain, I mean, it's not that like the US doesn't encourage, like they also have sectors like finance, and they have sectors that, legal profession and other professions that are more traditional. But I think where there is a lot of, there is, I think, from the ground up, a lot more mobilization of educational programs, all the way to actually, ensuring that becomes more and more mainstream. So this whole concept of software eating the world. But having said that, I mean, that's still also like a minority subset in the US as well. So most people, if we talk about like, have you watched Silicon Valley, this series, or like I guess it's Singaporean, it's like they'll catch no ball. I mean, like most people are like, what, and I think that's the truth of both ends. Key point here is, I think there's more that, so there's right now we do have a lot of, we want to make sure that Singapore becomes more innovative. A lot of it is how fast the rate of adoption and exposure happens. I sometimes I wonder, like right now we're finding every person we hire, like for example, I was talking to one of our newest hires is a sales, a commercial business development lead. And she was telling me she graduated from SMU, and for her entire class, she said only 2 people joined a startup, and how about tech companies? She was like, don't think that's the case yet. Maybe a handful joined a tech company, and the rest all joined banks and consulting firms. Not saying that's a bad thing. I experienced that in the US too. From business school, majority of people still went to, I guess, particularly to my business school, majority still went into finance and consulting. So I wouldn't say that problem is specific to Singapore, but because of the larger population there, they can, I guess, afford to, they still have innovation moving at a fast pace. But whereas for Singapore, if you have a sort of a little slither, I wonder how much progress can be made within a decade, So
civil service hire a lot of people, hire a lot of talents, right? So
So the tipping point, and I think it's also, and then when you don't have education, or you don't have sort of this, people understanding truly what it means to I wouldn't say this is the best way to kind of, you don't need to be a startup or a founder or entrepreneur or work at a tech startup to be doing really what you want. But I do think that more exposure and education of this path could be pretty good just as an option. And I think that's really great. I think the problem is when people don't even know that that's this option, and they're not exposed to it nor even educated on it. Then I think that's a pity, because but even after they're educated on it, right? Like I think how many will truly get the support of people around them? And there's this sort of social validation too, or how you've been taught to be validated, right? Like, I think typically, for example, the moment you think, you're like, I think we still have this concept like, you're an entrepreneur, or you must be like, be toxic on it.
Irresponsible, right?
Or you're responsible, or you can't study.
Or you come from a rich family,
you come from a rich family, privileged position.
You can afford to fail.
You can afford to fail, all these things, and
that's some elements of that still exist. So because we also understand that the government is also trying to push a lot of startups, right? They created more incentives for startups to exist, and also for investors to invest in startups. But I feel it's still a very top-down kind of solution, which Singapore has always been using that for a long time, and it worked well for us. But I'm just not sure whether entrepreneurship can be dictated top-down or put it in a softer tone, encourage top-down. I'm not sure about that, right? Do you have like a solution to make Singapore more entrepreneurial?
Yeah, I mean, I think when was the NOC program born? Do you know? This was like, yeah, I think within the last 10 years, I would safely say.
Yeah.
So I think that's like literally we've hired like so many NOC interns, grads, and actually most of our interns come from an NOC program, and most of our entry level positions are filled by NOC grads. And that says something, right? That says something. So. And I always think about it, and I feel a little bit sad sometimes that we have to send someone, like we have to export them, and then only when they come back, then they're open to entrepreneurship. But then the question is, how come we can't have someone born here, grew up here, spend all their life here, that was never exported to somewhere for 1 year, to actually have that. And you look at most of the founders, I won't say all, most of the tech founders, actually most who are local, most of them either have some form of overseas working experience or they've been through NOC, and quite a number, majority. And I think that to me is, put simply, I think I would hope that we would look at that.
I see.
The government
So it's more like, it's not like a cultural thing, right? The experience and exposure.
I think so, because when they can see like a live example and they're like, hey man, this person is just exactly like me, where there's no difference between both of us. He's equally he's in his early 20s and he's equally pimply. I'm just joking, but he's just a regular guy and I'm a regular guy or girl, she did this and she's only in her, she's a teenager and she's launched an app already and sold it. Hold on a second, what's so different? We're both computer scientists, graduates or whatever. I think that the role model part is important, but the viable path visualization is important, because then you start sort of thinking, you start assessing, is this what I want? And whether is this the path that I want to set for myself? And I think that's super key, because if you've never been given that opportunity to see that as a viable option, it's very hard to make that a reality. So, and everyone needs some form of guidance, right, and help and support at some point.
Definitely agree. I think it's a very good point. Yeah, Leon just shared that probably because Singapore, the environment is too comfortable here. I always joke with friends that saying that it's always easier for someone to write about a policy to encourage people to take risks than to take risks themselves, right? So that ends up, a lot of Singaporeans tend to choose the more comfortable path, the safer path towards the career option. Just don't screw up things, just play it safe and eventually you'll be fine, right? It's almost an old mantra that most parents will pass down to their kids, that study hard, then find a good job, right? It's almost that is the blueprint for life.
That's the thing, I would say that there's something necessarily wrong with that. There's nothing with wanting a good life, but I think if we believe that there are problems to solve and things can be better, then definitely I think it would be good to have more innovation. Just means that more solutions are being created, because what's the end goal? And you're right, I think there's a lot of comfort here. No shame in wanting comfort, I think.
First world problem.
It's a first world problem, yeah. But I also think that, interestingly, I think this is something, an anecdote as well. I was having a chat with a friend of mine who's an expat a couple of days ago, and she was saying she has kids here. So they moved here 8 years ago, and she never expected to stay all the way. So she stayed with her husband, and so we were having a chat together as well. And then basically she was saying, "Oh, I worry about my kids." I was like, huh? I thought that was such an interesting thing to say. Because what do you mean? What do you mean you worry about kids? Because they're growing up in Singapore. I mean, she knows that I won't take offense and anything. Just being very open. And she was like, oh yeah, because I feel like the kids. I mean, she basically said, oh, it's like living in a resort your whole life. And I thought that was so interesting because, well, I wouldn't say it's like a resort for everybody, because I think not everyone it goes through has those privileges in Singapore. But I think it was just an expression, as a point that she fears that her children will be too comfortable to the point that they don't know how to deal with hardship or I don't know. What do you think, Elvin? I want to hear what you think as well. Because I feel like just because there isn't, I think it's also good that we're able to have our basic needs met. And I think as a fool to romanticize insecurity or being impoverished, or to romanticize poverty or a lack of core human rights or security. That's ridiculous. So I think we have a lot to be fortunate about, to be grateful about. We're very fortunate, very privileged. So then the question of why does innovation matter? I think it really matters because I think that's a very profound question. Why do we even want more innovation? Isn't North Korea doing just fine? Not in terms of the political side, but in terms of their social well-being. And it's a very philosophical question, Alvin. Yeah. So maybe this one we can take over separately.
Yeah, I guess so, right? Because people may have very different views about this, right? Yeah, and you can get a bit more sensitive on that. Yeah, let's take it offline. Let's talk about Homage. Let's talk about Homage, right? Sure. So, what is the problem that Homage is trying to solve?
Yeah, I think we need more caregivers. Put simply, over the next 10 years, we do not have enough caregivers and healthcare workers because of a number of reasons. One is, more and more. I think if you look at the tipping point, all countries in Asia Pacific are moving from aging to aged, meaning this is 15% of total population will become age 65 and above. So every single country is turning into that zone. So the time is now to build a solution and we look at the caregiver and nurse to population ratios, and we're looking at ongoing lack of infrastructure to support the rising needs of a few things. Because you see, over the last 10 years, we have had a lot of urbanization. So this is a world problem, is a social problem. So a lot of people move to cities, but that leads to bad habits and so on, so forth, longer working hours. So this rise of deaths it's a bit morbid, but this rise of deaths from chronic disease, right? And the occurrence of incidents of chronic disease. So the diabetes, stroke, Parkinson's, dementia, sharply on the uprise. And then coupled that with aging population, I think we have a very important global problem to solve. So we need to ensure that we build infrastructure, work together with the government to do that, partner the government to ensure that we have sufficient infrastructure to provide what we call long-term care. We've traditionally very much focused on acute care, which is care within a hospital or, but when it comes to long-term holistic care, that's where there's a huge gap in actually, I would say in most of ASEAN, there's this huge gap. So, we want to solve this problem by ensuring that we have a strong pool of curated, we have a strong pool of curated caregivers, nurses, doctors, therapists, counselors, and we can enlarge that pool and standardize the training, and then of course tap into the power of technology to deliver the necessary care where people are. So I think that's something we find tremendously meaningful. So we've expanded to close to 3,000, 4,000 caregivers and care professionals across doctors, nurses, and caregivers and therapists and so on. So it's been, and they're growing a second income, and I love that. 70% are women. I think that's great. I think we want to play the part in ensuring that we lay that foundation. So technology-wise, we have organizations that are tapping onto our services directly, and then they also using parts of our technology to make their operations more efficient. So these are like hospitals and nursing homes and day centers and even corporates now pharmaceutical companies. Then of course, directly we have apps that allow for the caregiver to deliver care more efficiently, and then for families to use our app more efficiently to manage their own care and gain access to the kind of care that I would want for myself, for my family as well. Yeah.
So if I can put it in one sentence, it's like
Yes.
a Uber for aged healthcare, long-term healthcare.
I think there's a lot of parallels, like, Grab, Uber, two-sided platforms on the logistical level. So they're using technology to make sure that they can, essentially deliver the kinds of goods and services to people who need them, and the right ones and the right tier. But for healthcare, it's a little bit more complicated because the services are a little bit more specialized, heterogeneous. So the matching, I would say the matching and the routing there's a lot more
nuances to it. Right?
Nuances to it. Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Because a Grab driver with a passenger, they are all homogeneous, right? As long as you can drive and send that person from point A to point B, you're fine.
Yes.
But whereas the specifics in medical needs might be different for different kind of clients.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. Right. So if any one of you who needs like a long-term healthcare at home, right? So you definitely can check Homage out, and they will be able to facilitate and find the best healthcare specialists for your needs, right? Okay. And we know that this aging population is a growing problem. It's not just Singapore, as you mentioned. It's probably in a lot of developed countries, and even in developed countries like China, which have a huge population, right? So, but let's focus on Singapore first. Okay, I will believe that Homage will play a very important part as Singapore go along, right? But it's also a new phase that Singapore has never seen before, having more or bigger proportion of old people compared to the working population, right? So beyond just long-term healthcare, what do you think that we as a Singapore can do to improve the situation and or maybe take precaution of aging population, right? Since you are in this, every day, you should probably have more insights than the rest of us.
I think it's interesting. So there's this book called Being Mortal. So that's written by Atul Gawande, and they've of course won a bunch of awards and stuff. But it talks about I think aging is a human condition. So it's just, I think, recognizing that it's going to happen to everybody, and the needs that we have when we age, or unfortunately, if let's say we live with a certain kind of chronic condition or acute condition, I think generally they remain the same. As you can imagine, like if you think about yourself, like I think the most important thing is like when you start to become more dependent, then I think this notion of struggling to maintain dignity is important. So I would say enablement needs to be a core model, and then of course not. This concept of retirement, I think, is shifting. So our generation, I think, when we think about like what it means to retire, I think we think about it quite differently, I believe, right?
Until 100 years old, at least.
Yeah, I mean, I think people there's so much different kinds of lifestyles now, like nomadic living, and the way you think about your family, if you have children, and if you're empty nester, what you want to do. I think people have a lot of different ideas for our generation as opposed to generation above. So I would say being holistic, personalized, there's no silver bullet. But having said that, if there is a need for assistance, then I think being very thoughtful, and I would like to tie this back to Dr. Rao, you're welcome, is that I think very thoughtful about your finances, and it's really key because that's a big part of what you want, to how you think about investing, your financial planning, and your long-term, where you want to live, particularly looking at long-term care as a potential scenario that you need is really important. Yeah.
Because insurance don't cover long-term care at this point.
Well,
only certain conditions, more serious ones.
National insurance. So yeah, most insurance, critical illness insurance, do not cover it. But now national insurance like CareShield Life, which is going to be adopted later this year, is going to kick into play. So this is, and that's the thing, right? So it's also education so there's ElderShield, which is, will be sunsetted completely by CareShield. And CareShield also, now there are a lot of insurers that are looking at providing enhanced CareShield that would cover long-term care. So, and that's compulsory insurance, national insurance. It's almost like very similar to Australia, MediShield, but exactly. And I think that's it's going to be mainstream, because the moment that they understand that it's no longer this sort of pocket of the population that requires it, but everybody, or 30% of the population, which means almost all of the households, then I think you would see that tipping point in terms of a financing scheme.
Yeah, it's interesting that you brought up the finance part of healthcare, right? So I always thought that we have always looked at a lot of these domains as very separate entities, very stovepipe approach towards it, right? But actually, there are a lot of overlapping parts. If you don't take care of your health needs, you don't buy enough insurance, get covered. If something bad happens to you and you're not covered, and you will end up in financial difficulties, right? So I always dream of a state where technology can unite all these things together to really look at the very human-centric rather than very domain-centric kind of approach towards managing the country, the society, and things like this, right? Yeah, because to even in finance, it's like when you want to buy a house, you go to a real estate agent. When you want to buy insurance, you go to a financial advisor. But to the person, it's like, I'm just one person. Why do I need to look for so many people? And they only look at the problem with using one perspective. So health and finance is also another very separate domains. And only when, I need to make claims, then the finance come in, right? So I do hope that there's some marriage between a lot of these domains together.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And I think that's why, I think this notion of care planning, I think people traditionally think of it as very morbid, like, if only but that's the thing, that's the issue when it becomes very reactionary. But I think now, with all the tools and information on our hands, we can probably look to democratize some of that information. So, like, for example, rather than look at it from, that's the whole point that you buy insurance now, like for your home, is that like home insurance or car insurance. I think people should really look at what is it's a bit scary. I don't want to like maybe like bomb your users out like by those who are watching, but you're looking at like 1 out of like 2 out of 7, 1 out of 5, these kind of numbers when it comes to MCCs, multiple chronic conditions, and so on, and I think it makes a lot of sense to really be able to help people become more aware and break down the information to digestible pieces. Very similar to what Dr. Wealth is doing in terms of, hey, Dr. Health, hey, maybe that's a, yeah. So, it's very similar to the kinds of, yes, 谢谢你. Yeah, thanks. Auntie, 谢谢你啊. Okay, 不用, 谢谢. Yeah, sorry guys. So yeah, it's really, I think specific to, sorry, Alvin, what was I saying? saying bye to my clinic.
You're saying Dr. Health.
Sitting our office. Yeah. So Dr. Health. Yeah, no, I think it makes a lot of sense. Very similar to what we are, how you're educating people in terms of their finances. I think long-term care, we also need to, many times right now we have what we call a care concierge. So it's a care advisory team. So anyone can call in for like a free consultation. And we find that most of the conversations happen with, so and so, what X and Y just happened to my so and so, and what do I do? I'm completely lost. This is oftentimes how the conversation starts, and I can totally imagine it, because before I started working at Homage, I'm not in health, like I wasn't. My background is not in healthcare, and like I remember thinking to myself, so this happened, so what do I do? I literally have no clue, but I find that quite appalling in today's day and age, because we seem to be so clued up in so many things, like where to go to school, what to do. like, in terms of just a
What
lot
show
of
to watch on Netflix?
show to watch on Netflix. And so I think there needs to be, I think, more of just making it mainstream, like a topic that we can just talk about openly. Very similar to, I think, mental health, but wellness, I think, comes with every age, and specific when we're seeing even more and more earlier and earlier onset of these long-term care needs, for people to really understand what does care, what are healthcare and caregiving services. What do they comprise? Yes. Cecilia, auntie, sorry. Cecilia. She's so sweet. She gave me some water. She's so sweet.
Very nice of her.
Yeah, very nice of her. Yeah.
I'll pour my own drink. So
Sorry,
I guess probably it's because that you are very exposed to this area, right? So you definitely will see the importance of it. But I guess the rest of the Singapore population is like, bad things won't happen to me. I don't wake up to think about my long-term health care. I don't wake up to think that I may contract certain like chronic diseases, etc. So the education is important, but I find that it's very reactionary. When only something happened, then they went to for information.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think that's slowly changing because, for example, we're getting more and more sort of diagnostics. So digital therapeutics is one of the areas that we're seeing being adopted. So throughout this COVID-19 period, Homage, we've actually worked with the government to roll some of this out for our migrant workers living in dorms, and they can start tracking their vitals and track symptoms early. And I can say that we're starting to move into more awareness. Why? Because you will realize the moment you hit your 30s, 40s, 50s, and let's say you're fortunate enough to still have a parent who's living, that issue will become relevant to you right away. And that's what we see across board. And this is unfortunately just where we are in terms of the baby boomers, and this is just the trajectory. So if you're in your like 30s, 40s, and what's interesting is our caregiving workforce, majority are aged between 25 to 40 years old. I was very shocked. I was thinking most of them would be in their 40s, 50s, and so on. But there's a good number of people in their 20s. And very interestingly, when you talk to them, I mean, some is because they have a social work background, or but many of them actually have grandmothers, or they have people with their parents, immediate family, that actually went through that themselves. So I do think that there is more and more awareness. A country that we can look at actually in terms of how they've made it so normalized is Australia, and also some of the Scandinavian countries. They have a very every single teenager knows what is aged care. Really, they do know. They talk about it. They're like, oh yeah, there's all these options and aged care, and they don't call it home care. They call it like residential or aged care lah. So aged care.
How do they even get the young ones? How do they even get to be so familiarized with this?
Yeah, it's part of community involvement in school, and so it does stem from education, and of course it's how it's built into the fabric of their national fabric of their financing schemes and their funding schemes. And it's very it's also very democratized, because any provider can subscribe to be a nationalized, like for example, they have something called NDIS, the National Disability Insurance Scheme. So any provider can become an NDIS provider. And they have also something called a home care package, HCP, and that's completely standardized across all of Australia. Of course, there's some nuances state to state, but you generally can become a HCP provider. And so I think that's an interesting model. But in Singapore, we do see that, we see the local community care, long-term care sector being actually that's the beauty about sort of our schemes, is that we're actually quite well funded. And the government really takes proper care to put attention in this area. So I think every system has its issue. So like Australia, their bottleneck now is approving these schemes. So that every system has their own flaws.
Problems,
but I would say the awareness is much higher in Australia, much, much higher.
So do you have like stories where people come to you and say, I need the care, but I can't afford?
Yeah, no, we have stories that I think we have so many different kinds of stories, like people who realized that they could tap into subsidies and they didn't, and people who have tapped into subsidies that we're providing that indirectly through our partner, our subsidized provider partner. So I would say a good percentage of what we do is actually providing care to subsidized patients. And so that's good. I mean, it's great for us because we can provide care to those who can't afford it. And yeah, I think what's tough is the ones that are sandwiched, I would say, like those
It's just
those
barely can't make it.
yeah, or asset rich but cash poor. And as you're old, it's very tough to let go of your, let's say you have a landed property, and definitely you will not qualify for subsidies. But to ask someone who's in their 70s to move is also really difficult, So but I think the middle, the sandwich class is tough, lah. So they're middle, that low income, they're sandwiched between the middle and the low income. I think that group suffers a lot. Yeah.
It's actually a very big topic nationally, this sandwich generation. I think it's not just a Singapore thing, but it's a global thing, right? So I'm not sure. Usually, what would the advice be if, let's say, they happen to be in this situation?
Yeah, it's a tough one. So insurers, they look at it from like red, green, like red, orange, green. So if you're in the red zone, you already can't qualify for insurance. But that's why I start from green. That's why I really believe in this route of preventative. We got to start somewhere, right? So starting from ensuring that people are more aware of health and wellness from an earlier age, I think is important. Yeah, I mean, I think most people don't know how long-term care works in Singapore. I think that's, for me,
Yeah.
I don't blame them, because I didn't know. I didn't even know, to figure out how long-term care works. Oh, you mean this is how subsidization works? Oh, you mean 80% of the population will take long-term care funding? Oh, really? And there are all these amazing organizations that are doing phenomenal things. That's the thing. There's this whole world of the long-term care sector that I feel needs to integrate with our core society sector, and I mean, I'll talk about it a lot, but I'm passionate about this area. I really want to see some change happen, and hopefully just build over the next no matter how many years, and we just try to make some difference there.
Yeah, it's I didn't even know there is a Medi Fund, this kind of thing, because my wife works in social service office. Then I get to know about this. Otherwise, I don't know about all these subsidies, all this financing, all this funding.
Yeah, there was an announcement, and we were trying to also help to support to share. Okay, CareShield Life is coming out, and then most people were coming. Hey, you mean there was ElderShield, huh? And then that was going to be sunsetted. So they didn't even know that was the thing. But I think, however, I must say there has been some recognition that there is more educational. So I really do see that there's a lot of effort made, actually. I would say policy making is not easy.
Yep.
You can't please everybody. But at the same time, I do see strides being made on the policy angle, and also, of course, being able to communicate that on social media, for example, and to help educate the public more about long-term care. And the question is, yes, of course, it's the government's role but equally, I think it's also the role of individual, families to take that step, just like being financially educated, right? So, so that it's kind of interesting to see. I do believe that there's been, for example, AIC and Pioneer Generation Office merged, and the AIC is, as you know, the Agency of Central Integrated Care, and they merged with PGO, and so they're doing door-to-door knocking on trying to educate people on the kinds of subsidized programs out there, and they're actually deploying it's very impressive. They're deploying thousands of volunteers just knocking on doors to help people better understand. I think that's really, really great. We've met people from on the ground from AIC doing that, mobilizing the educators on the ground, and they do it, man. And there's a lot going on. It's just, of course, there can always be more. So
I think the communication part is probably a very key thing to educate the public, right? Because it's not easy to even if you want to communicate, but it also depends on the receiver end, right? Whether they want to receive it, because you can just post something on the social media, but you can't fight a cat video, right? That takes priority over some
you can
financial
never
knowledge.
never fight cat videos.
Exactly.
Cat videos are hard to fight. Cat videos are hard to fight.
We do recognize the communication challenges, but I think the door-to-door method works, especially for a vulnerable group of people who even probably they are not even online, right? So that's probably the only means for you to reach them. I think probably the government also recognize that it's not just setting good policies, but also to really communicate such that people will utilize it, the right people will utilize it at the end of the day. I think that's important. Right?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So for Homage, right, where do you see in the near future, right? Do you want it to really focus on the Singapore market, or there is some aspirations for overseas expansion? Because we do know the aging population is not a Singapore problem, but it seems like a global problem. Is there such aspirations? What are the plans?
Yeah, so now we're actually operating in Singapore and Malaysia already. So we're in 2 markets at the moment. I think definitely the plan is to expand into more markets, and there are concrete plans. But I think until we, fully are there, then we'll share more news. But there's definitely plans to expand in third and fourth markets. Yeah.
Okay, sounds like it's already undergoing.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, that's good news. That's good news, right? So happy for you, right? Happy to hear that there are plans, because I also hope to see more Singapore-based companies to expand within the region, because I do know that the being an entrepreneur is not easy. The markets are very fragmented and very, very different.
Yeah.
Right. So it's good to hear. It's good to hear that.
Yeah, I think so. And it's good. And I think there's challenges that come with it, but it does make sense, I think, for specific types of businesses and business models and markets. So I think for us, we think that now is the probably a good time to look into expanding into our third or fourth markets.
And Singapore brand does have its prestige, right? And especially in healthcare, we are very well known in the region.
Yeah. I think that's certainly no, it's great. It's great to always proud to be headquartered in Singapore. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for building the entrepreneurship scene.
Why you say okay? Let's keep this more formal. Is it? I just
no. I mean, I really mean it, right? So we do need more entrepreneurs. That's my belief, right? Even though we know that at the end of the day, it will still be a small proportion of the population that will become entrepreneurs, but we do need entrepreneurs to push the society forward, because that is the edge of progress, right?
Yeah, I really think so. I really want. I think I'm with you, Alvin. I really want to see more local, homegrown companies and entrepreneurs, and even doesn't have to be tech. Even do you find yourself buying more local products just because it's local? Yeah, I'm one of those people. I would definitely for example, just buying any kind of even cards, birthday cards. There's whole bunch of artists now, Singapore artists, and yesterday I was just in Joo Chiat and they had this place called Cat Socrates. But anyway,
okay,
and tons of local artists with their products. But anyway, I was just saying, absolutely, we need to support more local founders for sure.
Yeah. So definitely, you guys, if you are hearing and you need certain healthcare needs at home, please check out Homage. Okay, support our local enterprises, right?
Thank you. Thanks, Alvin.
We're just slightly over an hour, so I will not take more of your time. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and your views and your ideas. And I do hope that your passion can rub off more entrepreneurs, especially the ladies. If you are hearing this, okay, please. I need more female audiences on the show, so please make up the statistics. And I know it's not easy being especially a female in this modern society, right? You need to balance a lot of things. Guys have it easy, Yeah, that really is true from my angle. I think my wife is having a more difficult time than myself, juggling work and family at the same time, right? So, but if let's say there is some pocket of opportunity for you to strike it out, yeah, definitely we would encourage you to do so. And thank you, Gillian, for sharing. And it's good to see you again, right? Hope that Homage can really break through the region and serve a lot more markets and do Singapore proud. Thank you, Gillian.
Thanks, Alvin. Good to catch up. Yeah, take care. We'll catch up again soon.
Okay, cheers, everybody. Bye.
Bye. Bye.